Imagine holding a book so powerful, it was said to whisper cures for ailments known and unknown. A book bound not just in leather, but in secrecy, its pages filled with illustrations of plants that could heal a fever or, according to legend, summon spirits from the shadows. This wasn't a simple farmer's almanac. This was a medieval herbal grimoire, a place where the meticulous science of botany intertwined with the profound mysteries of magic, a testament to a time when the line between a physician and a sorcerer was perilously thin. These were not mere books, they were dangerous treasures, compendiums of knowledge that could grant life or accuse you of heresy, depending on who was holding the candle. Their very existence was a quiet rebellion against the unknown, a human attempt to impose order on a chaotic and often terrifying world. Our journey today takes us deep into the heart of these enigmatic texts, into the candlelit chambers of monastic scribes and the hidden workshops of wise women. We are going to decode the secrets of medieval herbal grimoires, to understand the world that created them and the powerful beliefs that filled their pages. This is a story of incredible courage and profound fear. It's a story about the desperate human need to heal, to protect, and to understand the forces of nature that governed every aspect of life, from a simple toothache to the terrifying sweep of the plague. We often picture the Middle Ages as a time of darkness, but within these manuscripts we find a flickering, determined light, a relentless pursuit of knowledge that operated in the spaces between accepted science and forbidden arts. So prepare to step across that shadowy line, to explore a realm where every root and petal held a double meaning, capable of both earthly remedy and unearthly influence. We will uncover the hidden symbols, decipher the coded recipes, and meet the fascinating, often misunderstood figures who risked everything to create and protect this knowledge. This is more than a history lesson. It is an invitation to witness the raw, ambitious spirit of an era that saw the divine in a dewdrop and the devil in a drought. By the end of our exploration, you will see these ancient books not as relics, but as living echoes of a time when humanity reached for understanding with both a healer's hand and a mystic's heart. Let us begin. To truly grasp the unique nature of these books, we must first understand the very words used to describe them. The term herbal is straightforward enough, pointing directly to the plant-based knowledge contained within. But grimoire, that word carries a much heavier, more mysterious weight. It originates from the Old French grammaire, which itself comes from the Latin grammatica, meaning grammar or learning. However, during the Middle Ages, grammaire became associated with complex, esoteric knowledge, the kind found in books of magic. So, a grimoire was fundamentally a textbook of the occult, a manual for rituals, summonings, and spells. When we combine these two concepts into herbal grimoire, we get a book that is a fascinating hybrid. It is not merely a list of plants and their medical uses, which would be an herbarium. And it is not solely a book of magical invocations, which would be a classic grimoire. Instead, it exists precisely in the fertile ground between the two. Think of it as a practical guide for navigating a world where every aspect of life was believed to be interconnected by invisible threads of influence. For the medieval mind, the physical and the spiritual were not separate realms. A disease was not just a biological malfunction. It could be a curse, a demonic influence, or an imbalance in the body's alignment with the stars. Therefore, a cure had to address all these possibilities. A simple poultice made from yarrow might stop a wound from bleeding, but for it to be truly effective, it might need to be prepared under a specific phase of the moon, perhaps while chanting a particular prayer or incantation. The herbal grimoire recorded this complete, holistic prescription. It was a book of secrets because this integrated knowledge was powerful and, to some authorities, dangerously unorthodox. These manuscripts often followed a distinct structure. They would typically begin with an index of plants, sometimes organized by the ailments they treated or, more intriguingly, by their planetary or zodiacal affiliations. For instance, a plant like rosemary associated with the sun would be used for ailments of the heart and for rituals requiring clarity and protection. Vervain, sacred to Venus, might be employed in love potions or for healing diseases of the reproductive system. Following the plant index would be the recipes themselves, complex formulas that blend botany, astrology, and ritual. A typical entry might read less like a modern medical instruction and more like a magical recipe. To cure a fever born of malefic humors, gather the petals of the red rose when Mars is ascendant. Crush them with rainwater collected in a silver bowl during a thunderstorm, and administer 3 drops to the patient while reciting the benediction of Saint Lazarus. This blending of science and superstition was not seen as a contradiction. It was the highest form of practical wisdom. The creator of such a book was often a highly respected figure in their community, a monk in a secluded monastery who had access to classical texts from Greece and the Arab world, or a local wise woman who possessed generations of oral tradition about the properties of local flora. They were the doctors, the chemists, and the spiritual advisors of their time. Their grimoires were their most prized possessions, tangible representations of a lifetime of observation, experimentation, and faith. To own one was to hold a key to the hidden workings of the world, a key that could unlock the door to healing or, if one was not careful, attract the suspicions of those who feared such power. These powerful manuscripts did not simply appear. They were painstakingly brought to life by the hands of specific individuals working within a world pulsating with both deep faith and profound superstition. To understand the grimoire, we must first step into the dim, quiet spaces where they were created. The most iconic of these settings is the monastic scriptorium, a room within a monastery where monks spent their days in silent devotion copying ancient texts. But their work was far from mere repetition. These scribes were often the most learned men of their time, preserving not only religious scripture but also the scientific and medical knowledge of classical antiquity, the works of Pliny, Dioscorides, and Galen. In the flickering candlelight, surrounded by the scent of ink and parchment, a monk might carefully transcribe a description of a healing plant. Yet, as he worked, he might add a marginal note, a gloss from local folklore he had heard, suggesting the same plant had the power to ward off evil spirits if placed under a child's crib. This was the birth of the grimoire's hybrid nature, a slow layering of official knowledge with unofficial, practical, and often magical belief. The monastery's library was a fortress of knowledge, but the scriptorium was its forge, where different strands of understanding were melted together into something new and potent. Yet not all this wisdom was confined behind monastery walls. Out in the villages and towns, another vital figure practiced her art, the wise woman or cunning man. These individuals were the practical doctors of their communities, possessing an intimate, generational knowledge of the local flora. Their laboratories were not quiet scriptoria but humble cottages and herb gardens, their libraries often held entirely in memory. A wise woman knew which leaf could soothe a burn, which root could ease a cough, and also which combination of herbs gathered at a specific time and with specific words spoken might protect a household from misfortune. Her knowledge was empirical, born of centuries of observation, but it was seamlessly woven into the spiritual fabric of daily life. While the monk worked from text, the wise woman worked from oral tradition, a living repository of secrets that were just as likely to be whispered as written down. When such knowledge was eventually committed to parchment, often by a literate client or a sympathetic local priest, it carried the raw, unfiltered power of the earth itself, less concerned with classical authorities and more focused on immediate, tangible results. Then there were the apothecaries and the alchemists who operated in the bustling marketplaces or in private workshops. The apothecary was a bridge between the scholarly and the practical, translating the complex recipes of the grimoires into actual salves, tinctures, and potions that could be sold. His shop was a sensory overload of smells, drying herbs, exotic spices, and strange chemicals. He needed to understand the grimoire's instructions not just as magic, but as precise formulas. The alchemist, meanwhile, sought the deepest secrets of nature, aiming to transform base metals into gold and discover the elixir of life. For them, plants were not just remedies, they were part of a cosmic system of correspondences. A plant's color, its planetary association, the time of day it bloomed, all these were clues to its hidden essence. An alchemist's grimoire would be filled with astrological charts alongside plant drawings, believing that to harvest a plant under the correct celestial alignment was to capture a piece of that celestial power. This diverse group of creators worked within a shared intellectual atmosphere that seems paradoxical to us today. Medieval Europe was a place where faith in God was absolute, yet belief in demons, spirits, and magical influences was equally widespread. This was not a contradiction but a complete worldview. Every event, from a good harvest to a sudden illness, was seen as having both a natural and a supernatural cause. A storm might be an act of God, but it could also be the work of a malevolent witch. A healing spring might be a gift from God, but its waters could also be enchanted by a local fairy. This superstitious atmosphere was the very soil in which the herbal grimoire grew. It created a desperate need for protection and understanding, a need that these books fulfilled. They were tools for navigating a world that was beautiful, bountiful, and terrifyingly unpredictable. The people who made them were not necessarily rebels or heretics. Most saw themselves as pious individuals using every tool at their disposal, be it prayer, plant, or planetary magic, to heal, to help, and to bring a small measure of order to the divine chaos of creation. In an age where the vast majority of people could not read, a book was far more than an object. It was a vessel of immense and often terrifying authority. For the common person, the written word was not a tool for everyday communication, but a source of profound mystery. It was the domain of the clergy, the nobility, and the exceptionally learned. When a monk opened a massive tome during a church service, the power was not just in the holy words he spoke aloud, but in the very act of deciphering those silent symbols on the page. This lent all books an aura of the sacred and the supernatural. To write something down was to capture a thought, a recipe, a piece of magic, and give it a permanent form, allowing it to be transmitted across time and space, far beyond the reach of human memory or the fragility of oral tradition. Committing the secrets of herbs to parchment, therefore, was not a simple act of record-keeping. It was an act of consecration, of bottling lightning. Consider the alternative: knowledge passed down orally from master to apprentice, from mother to daughter. This was a living library, but it was vulnerable. A single plague, a famine, or an accusation of witchcraft could erase generations of accumulated wisdom in an instant. By writing this knowledge into a herbal grimoire, a creator was building a fortress for their secrets. They were ensuring that the precise method for distinguishing a healing mushroom from a deadly one, or the exact incantation needed to empower a love charm, would survive long after they were gone. This was preservation against the relentless erosion of time and catastrophe. But this permanence came with a grave risk. An oral secret could be denied, whispered away if the wrong ears were listening. A book, however, was tangible evidence. If a grimoire fell into the hands of an inquisitor or a suspicious lord, its pages became a damning testament, a literal record of practices that could be interpreted as heresy or diabolism. The very act that preserved the knowledge could also become the death warrant for its owner. This duality, the book as both lifeline and liability, explains the elaborate precautions often found within these manuscripts. We see codes and ciphers not necessarily for the sake of mere puzzle making, but as a necessary layer of protection. A recipe might call for the tears of the moon, instead of simply naming a common plant like nightshade. making the text useless to a casual reader but clear to an initiated one. Illustrations, too, could be deliberately misleading. A plant drawn with an extra leaf or an incorrect flower might be a way to sabotage a rival or protect the unworthy from misusing a powerful substance. The book itself became a kind of sentient guardian of its contents, designed to reveal its truths only to those who possessed the key to its symbolic language. The power was not just in the knowledge it held, but in the ability to access that knowledge correctly. Furthermore, the physical creation of the book amplified its perceived potency. The parchment was made from the skin of an animal, a substance once alive. The inks were often concocted from strange ingredients: soot, crushed insects, iron salts, even blood. The very process of writing was a slow, meditative, almost ritualistic act. Each stroke of the quill was a deliberate investment of time and effort, infusing the page with the scribe's focus and intention. In a world alive with spiritual forces, the completed grimoire was not an inert object. It was a talisman. It was believed to absorb the power of the words and images it contained, and even the essence of its creator. To own such a book was to hold a condensed piece of that person's wisdom and spiritual force. This is why these books were often treated with such reverence, sometimes kept wrapped in special cloths or stored in locked chests, not just to hide them, but to contain and respect their inherent energy. The written word, therefore, transformed local folk knowledge into a portable, potent, and dangerously permanent artifact of power, a silent witness to humanity's enduring quest to master the forces of nature. Now let's turn the page and look closely at the art that brings these books to life. The illustrations found in herbal grimoires are far more than simple decorations. They are a complex visual language, a key to unlocking the book's deeper meaning. Unlike a modern botanical guide that aims for photographic accuracy, these medieval drawings often appear stylized, even surreal to our eyes. A mandrake root might be depicted as a tiny, agonized human figure. A peony could bloom with a face in its center. This was not a lack of skill or observation. It was a deliberate choice rooted in a profound belief called the doctrine of signatures. This principle held that God or nature had marked each plant with a sign, a signature, that revealed its purpose. A lungwort leaf, speckled and shaped like a lung, was therefore meant to treat respiratory ailments. A walnut, resembling a human brain in its shell, was considered nourishment for the mind. The illustrator's task was not just to record the plant's appearance, but to highlight these divine clues, making the hidden virtues of the herb visible to the trained eye. The accuracy of these illustrations was a matter of life and death. For the practitioner relying on the grimoire, correctly identifying a plant was absolutely critical. Mistaking harmless hemlock for poisonous fool's parsley could have fatal consequences. Therefore, the artists included specific, observable details: the serration of a leaf's edge, the number of petals on a flower, the way roots spread through the soil. They captured the plant at different stages of its life cycle: in seed, in bloom, in fruit, because a herb's potency was believed to change with the seasons. Yet, woven into this practical need for identification was a layer of potent symbolism. A plant associated with the sun might be drawn with golden ink or shown radiating light. Another linked to the moon might be depicted with silvery leaves against a starry night sky. These symbolic elements were not mere flourishes, they were instructions. They told the user not just what to pick, but when and under what cosmic conditions the plant's power would be at its peak. This belief in the image's power extended beyond mere representation. In the medieval worldview, there was a mystical connection between a thing and its likeness. To create a detailed illustration of a plant was, in a sense, to capture a portion of its essence or virtue on the page. This is why the act of painting was often treated with such reverence. The illustrator might prepare special inks infused with the very plant being depicted, or work on prayers and invocations to imbue the image with spiritual energy. The finished drawing was more than a picture, it was a reservoir of the plant's power. Some grimoires even suggest that simply meditating upon the illustration of a protective herb could offer a degree of spiritual defense, as if the image itself channeled the plant's beneficial influence. This concept explains why some manuscripts contain stunningly beautiful, full-page illuminations of certain plants. The art was functional, a way to concentrate and store the plant's magical properties within the book's protective covers. We also find a fascinating evolution in these illustrations over time. Early grimoires, often copied by monastic scribes who had never seen the original plants, contain drawings that are highly symbolic and sometimes wildly inaccurate based on descriptions in ancient texts. A banana might be pictured as a strange, curved cucumber. A coconut could be drawn as the head of a mythical monster. But as the centuries passed and exploration, trade, and direct observation became more common, the illustrations grew more naturalistic. This shift reflects a broader change in thinking, a gradual move from accepting ancient authority toward trusting one's own eyes. Yet, even as the drawings became more botanically precise, the symbolic language never entirely disappeared. The artist might render a St. John's wort plant with perfect accuracy, but still include a tiny, hovering sun above its yellow flowers, a silent nod to its ancient association with light and the banishment of darkness. The illustration, therefore, becomes a palimpsest, layers of practical knowledge, spiritual belief, and artistic tradition, all visible on a single parchment leaf. To decode these images is to understand that for the medieval mind, seeing was not just believing, it was a form of knowing and of harnessing the very forces of nature. But perhaps the most compelling idea that guided the hand of the illustrator and the mind of the herbalist was the doctrine of signatures. This was not a minor superstition. It was a foundational pillar of medieval natural philosophy, a grand and elegant theory that promised to make the chaotic abundance of nature legible to humankind. The core belief was breathtakingly simple yet profound. A benevolent and orderly creator would not leave humanity to wander blindly through a world of sickness and suffering. Instead, he had thoughtfully marked every healing plant with a clear sign, a signature, that revealed its purpose. The world was a vast, divinely authored book of medicine, and one only needed to learn how to read its pages. A plant's physical appearance, its shape, its color, even the environment where it thrived, was not random. It was a deliberate clue, a direct message from God about how that plant could serve humanity. This belief transformed the act of foraging from a simple gathering of ingredients into a sacred form of decipherment, a search for divine clues hidden in plain sight. Examples of this principle are both poetic and remarkably practical, revealing a worldview that saw the human body and the natural world as mirrors of one another. Consider the walnut, encased in a hard, skull-like shell. The nut itself, with its convoluted two-lobed form, bears an uncanny resemblance to the human brain. To the medieval herbalist, this was no coincidence. It was a clear signature indicating the walnut's use in treating ailments of the head and improving cognitive function. Similarly, the spotted, roughly lung-shaped leaves of the plant, aptly named lungwort, signaled its virtue in curing respiratory diseases like consumption and asthma. The vibrant yellow juice of the celandine flower was seen as a signature for treating jaundice, a condition that turns the skin yellow, following the ancient principle of like cures like. Even the habitat of a plant could be a signature. Willow trees, which thrive in damp, cold riverbanks environments associated with fevers and chills, were used for their bark, which we now know contains salicin, the natural compound from which aspirin is derived. The doctrine of signatures, in its own way, was an early, intuitive form of systems thinking, connecting the macrocosm of the environment to the microcosm of the human body through a web of visible correspondences. This interpretive system was incredibly flexible, allowing for multiple layers of meaning based on a plant's characteristics. The color red, for instance, was a powerful signature. A plant with red sap or red roots, like the bloodroot, was almost universally employed for ailments related to blood, from stopping wounds to regulating menstruation. Thorns and prickles were often interpreted as signatures of protection, leading to plants like hawthorn being used to create protective hedges not just in the physical world, but in the spiritual one as well, believed to ward off evil spirits and negative energies. The doctrine even extended to the timing of a plant's life cycle. Flowers that bloomed around the feast day of a particular saint might be dedicated to that saint and used to treat diseases under their patronage. This wasn't seen as primitive guesswork. It was a sophisticated, symbolic language that allowed practitioners to classify and apply the vast, overwhelming diversity of the plant kingdom in a coherent and spiritually meaningful way. It is crucial to understand that this was not considered mere folk magic, but a respected scientific and theological perspective. The idea had roots in the writings of classical authorities like Galen and Pliny, but it was most famously championed in the 16th century by the Swiss physician and alchemist Paracelsus, who argued that nature marks each growth, according to its curative benefit. For a society that believed the entire universe was created by a single, rational intelligence, the concept of universal signatures made perfect sense. It affirmed that the world was designed with purpose and that humanity, made in God's image, had the innate capacity to understand that design. This belief empowered the herbalist. It gave them a logical framework for their work, turning them from a simple collector of remedies into a decoder of divine intent. When a healer chose a plant based on its signature, they were acting in harmony with what they believed was the fundamental order of creation, aligning their will with the will of God. This spiritual confidence was as important a component of the cure as the biochemical properties of the herb itself, reinforcing the inseparable link between body and soul in the medieval healing arts. Within the hallowed silence of a monastery's walls, the cultivation of a garden was far more than a matter of sustenance. It was a profound act of faith, a living prayer. The monastic tradition of herbalism represents a fascinatingly sacred counterpart to the more profane or folkloric knowledge of the village wise woman. For the monk, every aspect of working with plants was imbued with religious significance. The monastery itself was seen as a mirror of the Garden of Eden, a sanctuary of order and divine harmony in a fallen world. Tending the herb garden, or the physic garden as it was often called, was a sacred duty. Weeding was a battle against chaos, pruning a lesson in discipline, and harvesting an act of grateful reception of God's providence. This was a world where spirituality and practicality were seamlessly intertwined. A monk might recite psalms as he planted rosemary, believing the sacred words would bless the plant and enhance its healing virtues. The garden was an outdoor chapel, and the plants themselves were seen as God's pharmacy, created for the alleviation of human suffering. The intellectual engine of this sacred herbalism was the monastery's library and scriptorium. Here, monks meticulously copied and preserved the medical texts of antiquity, the works of Greek physicians like Dioscorides and Galen, as well as contributions from Arab scholars whose knowledge had filtered into Europe. But they did not merely copy, they synthesized. A monastic grimoire was often a hybrid creation, blending the authoritative science of the classical world with local folk remedies and, crucially, a layer of Christian piety. A recipe for a healing salve might begin with instructions to gather comfrey leaves, but then include a directive to pray over them, perhaps invoking the intercession of Saint Luke, the patron saint of physicians. The resulting book was a practical medical manual, but its authority derived from both empirical observation and divine sanction. It was a tool for fulfilling the monastic vow of charity, specifically the care of the sick. The monastery's infirmary was where this knowledge was put into action, offering treatment to ailing brothers and very often to the poor and desperate who sought help at the monastery gates. The structure of these monastic grimoires was typically methodical and orderly, reflecting the disciplined mind of their creators. They often began with a calendar listing which herbs should be planted, harvested, or processed according to the liturgical year. The feast days of saints became natural markers for agricultural and medicinal activities. The feast of Saint John the Baptist in midsummer, for example, was considered an exceptionally powerful time to gather certain herbs, like the protective Saint John's wort, whose yellow flowers were said to be at the peak of their potency when the sun was at its zenith. The plant entries themselves would describe the plant's physical appearance, its therapeutic uses, and instructions for preparation, creating tinctures, poultices, or distilled waters. Yet, alongside this practical information, one might find a note on the plant's symbolic meaning. The violet, with its modestly drooping head, symbolized humility. The evergreen ivy represented eternal life. This layered approach treated healing as a holistic process, attending to the soul of the patient as well as the body. A quintessential example of this tradition is the Hortulus, or Little Garden, a poem written by the 9th century monk Walfrid Strabo. It is both a beautiful piece of literature and a detailed guide to the monastic garden. Walfrid describes 23 different plants, celebrating their beauty and their utility with equal reverence. He writes of the sage, "Death to the sage is a thing that is slow to approach," praising its health-giving properties. He speaks of the lily's purity and the rue's protective power against poisons and evil spirits. For Walfrid, there was no contradiction between appreciating a flower's beauty, understanding its medical use, and contemplating its spiritual symbolism. The garden was a school where one could learn about God by studying His creation. This attitude elevated the work of the herbalist monk from a mere chore to a form of devotion, a continuous dialogue with the divine through the medium of the earth. These monastic compilations became crucial repositories of knowledge, especially during the tumultuous early Middle Ages when much classical learning was preserved only within the relative safety of the cloister. They served as the foundational textbooks for medieval medicine for centuries. However, the sacred nature of this knowledge also placed certain limits on it. Monastic herbalism generally operated within the bounds of orthodox Christian theology. While it accepted the doctrine of signatures as evidence of God's design, it was often wary of the more overtly magical practices found in folk traditions, spells that invoked spirits or practices that smacked of paganism. A monastic grimoire would far more likely prescribe a prayer to be recited with a remedy than a magical incantation. This distinction, however fine, was critical. It allowed monastic herbalism to flourish with the Church's blessing, creating a powerful, institutionally sanctioned tradition of healing that saw the grimoire not as a book of shadows, but as an illuminated guide to practicing Christian charity through the merciful art of medicine. Yet while monks worked in the sanctified light of the scriptorium, a different, equally vital stream of knowledge flowed outside the monastery walls, in the shadowy spaces between the Church's official approval and outright condemnation. This was the domain of the village wise woman. Her workshop was not a quiet garden of ordered beds, but a cottage on the edge of the woods, filled with the earthy scent of drying herbs hanging from the rafters and the gentle simmer of a pot over the fire. Unlike the monk, whose authority came from ancient texts, her power was rooted in the oral tradition, a deeply personal, generational wisdom passed from mother to daughter, from master to apprentice, through whispered secrets and hands-on demonstration. This knowledge was hyper-local, attuned to the specific plants, seasons, and spirits of a particular hillside or forest. She knew which mushroom could ease a pain and which could bring visions, which berry could cure a fever and which could end a life. Her role was that of healer, midwife, and spiritual counselor, the first person a villager would turn to for a child's fever, a cow's mysterious ailment, or protection from a malicious curse. The relationship between this folk tradition and the established church was deeply complex and often fraught with danger. On one hand, the wise woman's practices were woven from the same fabric of pre-Christian belief that saw spirits in streams and magic in the cycles of the moon. Her cures often involved incantations and rituals that the local priest might view as pagan superstition, or worse, a pact with the devil. Yet, in many communities, a pragmatic coexistence was the norm. The same villagers who attended Mass on Sunday might secretly visit the wise woman on Monday for a charm to ensure a good harvest or a potion to win a lover's affection. The church itself was ambivalent. While it officially denounced any magic not performed through its own sacraments, it often lacked the resources or the will to root out these deeply embedded local practices, especially when the parish priest might himself rely on the wise woman's remedies. This created a precarious existence for her. She was simultaneously revered and feared, an essential pillar of the community who could, in an instant, be transformed into a scapegoat if a harvest failed or a child fell ill. This constant threat of persecution is precisely what makes the idea of a wise woman's personal grimoire so compelling and so perilous. For a tradition that was fundamentally oral, the decision to commit secrets to writing was a monumental one. It was an act of preservation against the fragility of human memory and the sudden violence of a witch hunt. A handwritten book, perhaps bound in rough leather and hidden in a hollowed-out log or beneath a loose floorboard, could ensure that a lifetime of hard-won knowledge would not die with her. But such a book was also a smoking gun. If discovered by the wrong person, its pages of recipes for a love philter made from apple seeds and dew, or a protective amulet woven from specific grasses, could be twisted into evidence of diabolical witchcraft. This terrifying risk forced these grimoires to become masterpieces of coded language and personal symbolism. We can imagine the contents of such a book. It would lack the elegant Latin script and orderly structure of a monastic text. Instead, it might be written in the local vernacular, in a hand unused to the pen, filled with personal abbreviations and drawings that only the creator could fully decipher. A recipe might not name a plant directly, but instead describe it through a riddle or a story known only to her family. An illustration of a toad might not be literal, but a symbol for a particular type of mushroom that resembled one. These grimoires were not meant for a wide audience. They were intensely private manuals, their true meaning locked behind a veil of intimate knowledge. They represent a desperate attempt to give permanence to a wisdom that the authorities were actively trying to erase, a quiet rebellion written in the ink of necessity. The loss of this knowledge is one of the great tragedies of the period. For every wise woman who may have managed to create a hidden grimoire, thousands more saw their wisdom vanish, either extinguished with them during the witch trials or slowly diluted and forgotten as church authority grew stronger. What remains in the historical record is often filtered through the biased accounts of their persecutors, the transcripts of trials where their healing herbs were labeled as devil's weeds and their protective charms as satanic spells. This makes the hypothetical existence of a surviving wise woman's grimoire an object of immense historical significance. It would be a rare, unmediated voice from a largely silent segment of society, a direct window into a world of practical magic, profound empathy, and resilient resistance. It would show us not a witch from a fevered nightmare, but a skilled practitioner whose grimoire was not a book of shadows, but a lifeline, a tangible record of her unwavering commitment to mend the broken bodies and spirits of her community, no matter the cost to herself. This intricate dance between the earth and the heavens found its most sophisticated expression in the practice of astrological botany, a system where every root, leaf, and flower was seen as a terrestrial mirror reflecting the power of the stars. For the medieval herbalist, a plant's medicinal virtue was not a fixed property. It was a dynamic force that waxed and waned with the movements of the celestial spheres. To harvest a herb at the wrong planetary hour was to gather a hollow shell, devoid of its true power. But to pluck it at the precise moment its governing planet was ascendant was to capture a concentrated essence, a literal piece of celestial energy bottled in botanical form. This was not a matter of superstition, but of sophisticated timing, akin to a sailor using the tides. They believed the cosmos breathed life into the world in rhythmic pulses, and the key to unlocking a plant's full potential was to harmonize with that divine rhythm. The foundation of this system was the concept of planetary rulership. Each of the 7 known planets, the Sun, the Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn, governed a specific set of plants, linking their properties to the planet's perceived nature and mythological associations. The Sun, as the source of light and life, ruled plants that were vibrant, warming, and beneficial to the heart and vitality, such as sun-worshipping flowers like marigolds and chamomile, or majestic trees like the oak. The Moon, governing flux, intuition, and fluids, presided over plants with soft, moist leaves like the willow, or those associated with sleep and dreams such as the poppy. Mars, the planet of war, ruled sharp, hot, and aggressive plants, thistles with their protective spines, nettles with their stinging hairs, and herbs like garlic and mustard that produced intense heat within the body, used to drive out cold, ailments, and infections. This system of correspondences created a vast, interconnected map of the natural world, where a plant's physical characteristics and its astrological signature were 2 sides of the same coin. But the true art lay in applying this map to the practicalities of time. A medieval grimoire would not simply instruct a healer to gather rosemary. It would command them to do so in the first hour of the sun on a Sunday, when the solar influence was at its peak. This required an intimate knowledge of the planetary hours, a complex division of the day and night into 24 unequal segments, each ruled by a different planet in a repeating cycle. Calculating these hours was a task in itself, as their length changed with the seasons. The practitioner needed an astrological almanac or the skill to create one, transforming the simple act of picking a plant into a carefully orchestrated ritual. The belief was that during its planetary hour, a herb was spiritually awake, its virtues amplified and most receptive to being harvested for a specific purpose. Preparing the remedy under the same celestial influence further charged it, aligning the finished potion or amulet with the desired cosmic force. This celestial logic extended beyond the planets to the 12 signs of the zodiac, which were believed to govern different parts of the human body. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, and so on. Therefore, an illness in a specific part of the body was best treated with a herb ruled by the planet that governed the corresponding zodiac sign, and ideally prepared when the moon was passing through that sign. For instance, a headache might be treated with a sun-ruled herb like rosemary, but the remedy would be considered most potent if prepared when the moon was in Aries. This layered approach created a multi-dimensional prescription, targeting the ailment on physical, astral, and spiritual levels simultaneously. It was a holistic system that saw the patient not as an isolated body, but as a microcosm intimately connected to the macrocosm of the universe. We can see the breathtaking complexity of this system in a typical grimoire entry. A recipe for a talisman to promote courage and protection might read, "To fashion a charm against fears and phantoms, you must seek the root of the angelica plant." This herb is a child of the sun, whose light banishes shadows. Let it be gathered in the first hour of a Sunday, when the sun's power is newborn and strong. Then take the root and carve it with the symbol of Leo, the lion's sign, while the sun transits that fiery constellation. Carry this talisman upon your person, and the courage of the sun and the heart of the lion shall be your constant companions. Every element is deliberate and interconnected. The plant, the planet, the day, the hour, and the zodiac sign all work in concert to produce a specific intended outcome. This was the grand ambition of astrological botany, to harness the entire machinery of the cosmos through the humble medium of a leaf or a root, weaving the threads of celestial influence into a tangible tool for healing, protection, and transformation in the human world. And so we come to one of the most precise and pervasive applications of this cosmic clockwork, the powerful influence of the lunar cycle. If the planets provided the address for a plant's power, the moon acted as the master key, unlocking that power in a rhythmic, predictable dance. The moon's ever-changing face was not just a celestial light show. It was a fundamental pulse governing the flow of all moisture on Earth, from the vast ocean tides to the subtle sap rising within a stem. For the medieval herbalist, this was an undeniable fact of nature. Just as the sea was pulled by the moon's gravity, so too were the hidden fluids within plants and the human body. This belief made the moon's phase the single most critical factor in determining not just when to harvest, but what to harvest and for what purpose. A remedy prepared without regard for the moon was considered haphazard at best and utterly impotent at worst. The fundamental rule was elegantly simple and rooted in direct observation. The moon governs growth and moisture. As the moon waxes, growing from new to full, it was believed to pull fluids upward, filling the plant's above-ground parts, its leaves, stems, and flowers, with vibrant, concentrated energy. This made the waxing moon, and particularly the full moon itself, the optimal time to gather any part of the plant meant for nourishing, building, or strengthening the body. Herbs for tonics, salads, or flowers for perfumes and joyful incenses were best picked under the full moon's bright light, when their life force was at its absolute peak. Conversely, as the moon wanes, diminishing from full to dark, its pulling power recedes. This was thought to cause the plant's energies, its vital sap, to retreat downward, concentrating in the roots. The waning moon, therefore, was the time for harvesting roots, as well as for gathering plants intended for purging, reducing, or banishing, such as herbs for laxatives or plants used in spells to diminish negative influences. This logic extended even further into nuanced distinctions. The new moon, a time of darkness and potential, was considered ideal for gathering leaves meant for treatments related to endings and new beginnings. Perhaps a cure for a lingering illness or an ingredient in a charm to turn over a new leaf in one's life. The belief was that the plant's energy, while concentrated in the root, was poised for a new upward journey, making its properties particularly potent for transformative work. The first quarter moon, as light began to return, was excellent for harvesting plants for growth and projects requiring a strong start. This intricate timing transformed the herbalist's calendar into a dynamic, living schedule where a single plant could be visited multiple times throughout a lunar cycle, each visit yielding a different part with a uniquely empowered virtue. We can see this principle in action with a plant like the common dandelion. If an herbalist needed the dandelion's leaves for a spring tonic to cleanse the blood and revitalize the system after a long winter, she would venture out under the full moon. The leaves, brimming with lunar-charged sap, would be at their most succulent and nutrient-rich. But if the requirement was for dandelion root, a powerful liver detoxifier and diuretic, the ideal time was during the waning moon, preferably just before the new moon. At this time, the bitter, medicinal compounds were believed to be most concentrated in the root, making the decoction far more effective for its purgative purpose. The same plant, harvested at different celestial moments, became two distinct medicines. This practice was more than mere superstition. It was a sophisticated form of biological observation. While we now understand plant growth through the lens of hormones like auxins, the medieval herbalist observed the same patterns and attributed them to a cosmic force. Their system worked because it was based on real, observable rhythms in nature. A root harvested after a dry, waning moon period is often easier to dig and may indeed have a different chemical profile than one pulled from rain-soaked ground during a full moon. The genius of the system lay in its ability to codify these natural cycles into a practical, repeatable method that ensured consistency and potency in their remedies. It was a way of working with nature, not against it, of aligning human intention with the grand tidal rhythms of the earth itself, all guided by the silent, silver clock in the night sky. This meticulous attention to cosmic timing was only the first step in a much larger, more sacred process. For the medieval herbalist, the act of creating a medicine was not a simple mechanical procedure. It was a ritual, a ceremony that transformed the practitioner and the plant alike. The belief was profound. The physical efficacy of a remedy was inextricably linked to the spiritual conditions under which it was prepared. A potion made with the correct herbs but created with a distracted mind or impure hands was considered little more than colored water. But that same recipe, prepared with focused intention, specific sacred tools, and recited words of power, became a vessel for forces beyond the physical, a true alchemy of spirit and matter. The choice of tools was never arbitrary. The grimoires are very specific, often insisting on instruments made of particular materials believed to conduct or amplify certain energies. Silver was a frequent requirement for knives used to harvest plants, especially those associated with the moon or used in healing. Silver's cold, reflective nature was seen as pure and incorruptible, a metal that could cleanly sever the plant from the earth without contaminating its essence. Ivory, harvested from animals but resembling a sacred, bone-like stone, was another prized material for pestles and bowls. It was considered neutral, not interfering with the plant's own vibrations. Using an iron knife, by contrast, might be strictly forbidden for certain delicate operations, as iron was associated with Mars, the planet of war, and its harsh, masculine energy could disrupt the subtle virtues of a peace-bringing herb. The very act of selecting and consecrating these tools was a ritual in itself. A new silver blade might be purified by passing it through the smoke of sacred incense or by leaving it bathed in moonlight for 3 consecutive nights, charging it for its future work. Equally important was the state of the practitioner. The concept of ritual purity is a thread running through almost all esoteric traditions, and medieval herbalism was no exception. Before even approaching the garden, the herbalist was often instructed to prepare themselves through fasting, prayer, or meditation. They might bathe in pure water, abstain from certain foods, or wear clean, preferably white, robes. This was not about hygiene in the modern sense, but about creating a vessel worthy of channeling healing power. A mind clouded by worldly worries or a body burdened by heavy foods was believed to introduce impurities into the medicine. The goal was to achieve a state of quiet focus, an inner stillness that would allow the herbalist to become a clear conduit for the plant's virtue, and, if they were a Christian practitioner, for divine grace. They were not just a technician mixing ingredients, they were a priest or priestess presiding over a sacred transformation. Then came the incantations. As the herbalist crushed the leaves in an ivory bowl or stirred the simmering pot, they would rarely work in silence. The air would be filled with words, prayers, psalms, or specific incantations written in the grimoire. For the monastic healer, these were often standard Christian prayers like the Pater Noster or the Ave Maria, recited in Latin to bless the work. But in a wise woman's cottage, the words might be older, passed down through generations in the local dialect. These weren't mere words, they were vibrations, a form of sonic alchemy intended to pattern the liquid or salve with a specific intention. A prayer for protection would be chanted into a protective amulet. A whispered plea for healing would be breathed over a fever-reducing tea. The sound waves were believed to physically structure the water in the remedy, imprinting it with the healer's will. The name of the plant itself was often spoken with reverence during harvesting, a way of asking permission from the plant's spirit and acknowledging the sacrifice it was making. We can reconstruct a typical ritual from the fragments found in various manuscripts. Imagine a healer preparing a simple sleep aid from chamomile, a plant ruled by the sun but used for its calming, lunar-like qualities. First, they would purify themselves and their silver knife, venturing into the garden at dusk. As the sun's power waned and the moon's influence grew, they would approach the plant. Instead of roughly cutting, they might kneel and speak to it softly. "Little son of the earth, I ask for your gift of peace." Using the silver blade, they would carefully cut the flower heads, placing them in a linen cloth. Back in the workshop, they would grind the flowers in an ivory mortar with a pestle, all the while reciting a prayer for tranquil sleep, perhaps invoking the aid of an angel of dreams. Finally, they would pour hot water over the crushed flowers, and as the infusion steeped, they would hold their hands over the cup, focusing their intention on transferring the essence of peace into the liquid. The resulting tea was more than a chamomile tea. It was a sacrament, a physical liquid charged with spiritual purpose, its effectiveness believed to be as much a product of the ritual as of the plant's chemistry. This holistic approach blurred the line between pharmacy and temple, treating the creation of medicine as the highest form of practical magic, a cooperation between human, plant, and the divine. Step away from the quiet garden and the solitary cottage for a moment, and into the bustling, aromatic heart of the medieval town. Here we find the apothecary's workshop, a place that was as much a laboratory as it was a marketplace of the marvelous. Crossing its threshold was an overwhelming experience for the senses. The air hung thick and heavy, a complex tapestry of scents. The sharp, clean fragrance of drying peppermint and sage competing with the earthy, almost fungal odor of rare roots, the spicy warmth of cinnamon and cloves from distant lands blending with the pungent, unsettling aroma of animal parts and strange resins. This was not the quiet sanctity of the monastery. This was the vibrant, chaotic frontier where the knowledge of the grimoires was translated into tangible power, bottled and sold. Your eyes would need a moment to adjust to the dim light, filtering through a single, dusty window to illuminate a scene of organized chaos. Every surface was crowded with purpose. Dozens of ceramic and glass jars lined rough-hewn shelves, each labeled with a cryptic hand or a simple symbol: a skull for poisonous nightshade, a star for star anise, a crude sun for saffron. Bunches of herbs dangled from the ceiling like strange, fragrant chandeliers, their drying leaves rustling softly in the draught. In the center of it all stood the apothecary's primary altar, the workbench. Stained dark by countless spills and etched with the cuts of knives, this table held the tools of the trade. The most essential was the mortar and pestle, often carved from a single block of heavy, non-porous marble or prized lignum vitae wood. This was where the transformation began, where dry leaves were crushed into fine powders, where resins were ground with salts, and where the rhythmic, grinding sound was the constant heartbeat of the workshop. But for the most complex and potent remedies, simple grinding was not enough. This is where the true marvel of medieval technology came into play, the distillation apparatus. A gleaming assembly of glass and copper known as an alembic would often be set up over a small, carefully controlled fire. It looked like something from a fantasy alchemist's dream, a spherical cucurbit flask holding the plant matter and water, connected by a narrow tube to a coiled condenser, often cooled by water, which would drip the purified essence, the aqua vitae or water of life, into a waiting receiver flask. The process was slow, magical. To watch the apothecary heat a simple rose petal infusion and capture its invisible spirit as a few precious drops of fragrant rosewater was to witness a kind of miracle. This was the pinnacle of their art, a method for extracting the very soul of a plant, creating concentrated elixirs that were the most valued and expensive items in their inventory. The grimoire was the sacred text that guided every action in this space. The apothecary was not just a shopkeeper, he was a skilled interpreter. A single cryptic line from a manuscript, take the tears of the dragon and the blood of a maiden, combine under the eye of the hawk, would be decoded into a practical recipe. Tears of the dragon might be a poetic name for a specific tree resin that oozed like tears, while blood of a maiden could refer to the juice of a rare red berry. Under the eye of the hawk might mean to perform the distillation at dawn when the hawk-like sun first appeared over the horizon. The apothecary's deep knowledge of this symbolic language allowed him to follow the grimoire's instructions precisely, weighing ingredients on a delicate brass scale, timing his work with an hourglass and maintaining the exact temperature of his fire to create a remedy that was believed to be both chemically and spiritually potent. This workshop was a crossroads of society. A wealthy merchant might come seeking a love philter, a knight a salve for a battle wound, and a desperate mother a remedy for her child's fever. The apothecary served them all, his authority drawn from the leather-bound grimoires on his shelf. He was a practical man of business, but he also existed in that ambiguous space between scholar and magician. His workshop was a testament to a world that believed in the hidden virtues of nature and humanity's ability, with the right knowledge and tools to unlock them. It was a place where the mystical words of a centuries-old book met the sharp scent of crushed herbs and the gentle drip of a distilled essence, creating a unique blend of commerce, science, and magic that defined an era's pursuit of healing. But what did a healer actually do with this cosmic calendar and these sacred tools? Let's open a typical grimoire to its practical heart, to the recipes intended for the everyday struggles of medieval life. These were not abstract theories, they were instructions for dealing with the sharp reality of a toothache, the terror of an infected wound, or the relentless chills of a fever. One of the most remarkable and enduring examples is the use of willow bark. A grimoire might instruct a healer to strip the inner bark from the white willow tree, dry it thoroughly, and boil it into a bitter tea to ease pain and reduce the heat of inflammation. We now know that willow bark contains salicin, a compound that the human liver converts into salicylic acid, the chemical ancestor of modern aspirin. The medieval herbalist had no concept of this biochemistry, but through centuries of observation, they understood the cause and effect. This specific bark, prepared in this specific way, reliably eased pain. They attributed its power to a cooling nature, perhaps associating the willow with the moon due to its love of water. But their practical result was sound, effective medicine that we still rely on in a refined form today. Another powerful and scientifically validated remedy involved the humble garlic bulb. Grimoires are filled with prescriptions for garlic to fight infections, both internally and externally. A common recipe might direct a practitioner to crush fresh garlic cloves, mix them with honey or animal fat to create a poultice, and apply it directly to a wound to prevent mortification, their term for the gangrene that could turn a simple cut into a death sentence. We now understand that garlic contains allicin, a potent antimicrobial compound that can indeed inhibit the growth of bacteria. Beyond topical use, garlic was also consumed to treat internal infections and respiratory ailments. The grimoire might add a layer of ritual, suggesting the poultice be applied while chanting a specific prayer or under a certain planet, but the core ingredient was chosen for its observable, powerful effect. This separation of historical fact from folklore is key. The garlic worked because of its natural chemistry, while the accompanying chant worked on the patient's psyche and the community's beliefs, creating a holistic package of healing. For digestive troubles, which were rampant in an era of uncertain food preservation, peppermint was a go-to remedy. A simple entry might read, "For a griping in the guts or a sourness of the stomach, take the leaves of the mint plant, steep them in hot water, and drink the infusion." Peppermint's effectiveness comes from menthol, which has antispasmodic properties that can relax the muscles of the gastrointestinal tract, providing relief from cramping and bloating. The grimoire might also recommend gathering the mint when the moon is in Virgo, the astrological sign associated with the digestive system, layering the practical with the celestial. Yet, even without this astrological timing, the mint tea itself would have provided genuine comfort. This illustrates how these books often contained a blend of directly effective advice and symbolic enhancements, with the practical core remaining valid across centuries. Then there were the remedies that leaned more heavily on folklore and the doctrine of signatures, yet still held a kernel of practical wisdom. Take the use of honey. Its application to wounds as a natural antibacterial agent is now well documented, but grimoires also prescribed it for soothing a sore throat and cough. A classic recipe might involve blending honey with lemon juice and perhaps a touch of powdered licorice root. The honey's viscosity coats and soothes the irritated throat, while its antimicrobial properties help fight infection. The grimoire, however, might frame this as harnessing the sunny essence of the bee's work, seeing the golden honey as a concentrated form of solar energy ideal for combating the cold damp of a chest cold. The folklore explanation was a framework for understanding an effect they could clearly observe but not scientifically explain in our terms. Perhaps the most fascinating cures are those where the line between fact and folklore is blurriest, such as the use of moldy bread. Some manuscripts contain instructions to place a piece of bread that has developed a blue-green mold directly onto a septic wound. This seems like pure superstition, a desperate act of sympathetic magic. Yet, we now know that the penicillium mold, which commonly grows on bread, produces the antibiotic penicillin. While the dose and purity would have been wildly inconsistent, the principle was accidentally sound. The medieval healer didn't know about antibiotics. They were likely following an oral tradition that had observed over generations that wounds treated this way were less likely to fester. They might have attributed the success to the mold's ability to draw out the evil poisons, but their empirical observation led them to a practice that foreshadowed one of the most important medical discoveries in history. These recipes reveal a world not of blind superstition, but of brilliant, intuitive experimentation, where careful observation of nature's patterns, even those they could not fully explain, led to genuinely effective solutions for the common ills that have plagued humanity for millennia. Yet, even as apothecaries dispensed remedies for common ailments, a far more ambitious quest captivated the greatest minds of the age, a pursuit that represented the ultimate goal of both herbalism and alchemy combined, the search for the elixir of life. This was not merely a desire to cure sickness, but a breathtaking ambition to conquer death itself, to prolong human vitality indefinitely and achieve a state of perfected existence. Within the most secretive pages of certain grimoires, we find recipes that transcend simple healing, detailing complex formulas for potions that promise to restore youth, grant boundless energy, and unlock the secret of immortality. This elusive substance was known by many names: the philosopher's stone in liquid form, the aqua vitae or water of life, the panacea for all diseases. Its pursuit was the driving force behind centuries of experimentation, a testament to humanity's most profound and enduring longing. The ingredients listed for these elixirs read like a catalogue of the rare and the symbolic, each component chosen for its perceived perfection or incorruptibility. Gold, the metal that never tarnishes, was a fundamental element. Alchemists believed that by dissolving gold into a potable form, a person could absorb its timeless, perfect essence, transferring its stable and luminous properties to the human body. This was not about mere wealth, it was about harnessing a metaphysical principle. The process of creating potable gold was incredibly dangerous, involving highly corrosive acids and precise heating in alembics, a literal trial by fire to transmute a base metal into a life-giving essence. Alongside gold, we find references to extremely rare and potent herbs often shrouded in legend. The mythical Rose of Jericho, a plant that could seemingly come back to life from a dead, dry state when placed in water, was sought for its symbolic resonance with resurrection. Mandrake root, with its human-like shape, was thought to contain a powerful vital spirit, while pearls, dissolved in vinegar, were believed to contribute their luminous, lunar purity to the mixture. The creation of an elixir was as much a spiritual operation as a chemical one, a transformative journey for both the substance and the alchemist. The grimoires describe processes that mirror the stages of spiritual purification. The first step, often called the negrido or blackening, involved putrefaction and decay, breaking down the ingredients into a uniform black matter. This symbolized the death of the old, impure self. Next came the albedo or whitening, a purification stage where the substance was washed and distilled until it achieved a brilliant white color, representing the cleansing of the soul. Finally, the rubedo or reddening produced the coveted red elixir, the color of blood and life, symbolizing the achievement of perfection and immortality. The alchemist had to mirror these stages within themselves, practicing asceticism, prayer, and meditation throughout the months or even years of laboratory work. Success was not guaranteed by technical skill alone. It required the operator to achieve a state of inner harmony with the cosmic forces they were attempting to harness. We can look to a famous historical figure to understand the powerful allure of this quest, the French alchemist Nicolas Flamel. According to legend, Flamel acquired an ancient book filled with arcane symbols he could not decipher. After decades of study and pilgrimage, he and his wife Peronelle allegedly succeeded in creating the Philosopher's Stone, and with it, the elixir of life. The legend claims they achieved immense wealth and immortality. While the historical Flamel was a real and successful scribe, the stories that grew around him after his death perfectly capture the era's fascination. His grimoire, whether real or imagined, became the archetype of the ultimate secret text, a guide not just to making gold, but to transcending the human condition itself. For every aspiring adept, Flamel's story was a beacon of hope, proof that the secrets of eternity could be unlocked by a dedicated seeker. But what was the reality behind these mythical recipes? From a modern perspective, many of the ingredients were at best placebos and at worst actively poisonous. Drinking a solution containing dissolved mercury or lead, as some recipes suggest, would certainly not grant long life. However, to dismiss the entire endeavor as foolishness is to miss its true significance. The quest for the elixir of life was the engine that drove profound innovation in chemistry and medicine. The alchemists' relentless experimentation with distillation, fermentation, and extraction developed the very laboratory equipment and techniques that would later form the basis of modern science. In their search for an impossible potion, they discovered new chemical compounds, improved methods for producing alcohol and acids, and laid the groundwork for pharmacology. The dream of immortality, however unattainable, pushed the boundaries of what was possible, transforming proto-science from a passive observation of nature into an active, interventionist practice. The grimoires of the elixir seekers are therefore not just records of superstition. They are the laboratory notebooks from humanity's first bold steps toward mastering the very processes of life and matter, a flawed but noble pursuit that ultimately helped illuminate the path to real scientific understanding. Yet for all their ambition to conquer death, the medieval herbalist was equally preoccupied with a force that governed the living with relentless power, the human heart. Tucked away in the more controversial sections of many grimoires, away from the remedies for fevers and wounds, we find recipes for a different kind of magic altogether, the creation of love philters and potions. These were not simple herbal aids for romance. They were potent concoctions designed to bend another's will, to ignite passion, or to ensure fidelity, operating in a morally ambiguous space where desire blurred into coercion. The very existence of these formulas reveals a deep understanding of love's chaotic nature and a desperate human attempt to control it through any means available, walking a perilous tightrope between perceived magic and powerful psychological suggestion. The ingredients for these potions were often as dangerous as they were symbolic, with one plant standing above all others in both its fame and its infamy, the mandrake root. Its human-like shape, often depicted as a miniature man or woman with a tuft of leaves for hair, made it the ultimate ingredient for love magic based on the doctrine of signatures. It was seen as a vessel containing a potent life force or spirit. Harvesting it was a terrifying ritual in itself. Grimoires warned that when pulled from the ground, the mandrake would emit a shriek so piercing it could kill a man or drive him insane. The prescribed method involved elaborate precautions, tying a dog to the plant and then enticing the animal to pull it free, sacrificing the dog to the root's deadly cry while the human practitioner stayed at a safe distance, ears stuffed with wax. Once obtained, a mandrake root would be treated like a sacred doll, washed in wine, wrapped in silk, and fed regularly. A small piece shaved off into a lover's drink was believed to transfer its powerful, compelling spirit, creating an irresistible attraction. Yet, the line between a love potion and a poison was terrifyingly thin, as mandrake is highly toxic, containing alkaloids that can cause hallucinations, delirium, and death. Beyond the legendary mandrake, a whole pharmacopoeia of botanicals was employed, each chosen for its symbolic or physical properties. Apples, associated with Venus and temptation since the Garden of Eden, were commonly used. A recipe might instruct a seeker to carve the name of their beloved into the skin of an apple, leave it to bathe in the light of a full moon, and then feed it to the desired person, transferring the intention through the fruit. Vervain, another herb sacred to Venus, was prized for its use in spells to reconcile quarreling lovers or to protect existing bonds. More psychologically astute were the recipes involving the recipient's own body. A common practice was to obtain a personal item, a lock of hair, a drop of blood, or even a piece of clothing stained with sweat, and incorporate it into the potion. This act, known as sympathetic magic, was believed to create an unbreakable sympathetic link between the potion and the person it was meant to affect, binding them to the will of the one who administered it. But how did these potions actually work? In a world without understanding biochemistry, the perceived success of a love philter can be attributed to a powerful combination of factors that had little to do with magical chemistry and everything to do with the human mind. First, there was the potent effect of belief and placebo. If both the administrator and the target sincerely believed in the power of the potion, the mere act of consuming it could create a powerful psychological shift. The target, aware they had been dosed, might start to reinterpret their own feelings, attributing natural attraction or affection to the potion's supernatural influence. This self-fulfilling prophecy could be startlingly effective, especially in a culture where the authority of magical symbols and rituals was unquestioned. Furthermore, many of these potions likely contained ingredients with genuine psychoactive or physiological effects, though not necessarily the ones intended. Alcohol was a common base, lowering inhibitions and creating a sense of warmth and intimacy. Herbs like damiana were used for their mild stimulant and purported aphrodisiac qualities. Other ingredients might have induced a mild state of euphoria or suggestibility. The real magic, however, was often in the ritual itself. The elaborate process of gathering ingredients at a specific astrological hour, chanting incantations, and focusing intense intention for days or weeks created a powerful state of expectation and confidence in the practitioner. This conviction was then transferred to the target through the administrator's demeanor and the powerful cultural symbolism of the act. The potion was less a chemical agent and more a physical focus for a profound act of psychological persuasion, a tangible symbol of a desire made manifest through ritual. This blurry line made love magic one of the most dangerous practices documented in grimoires. While healing a wound with a poultice was generally acceptable, attempting to subvert another person's free will was a serious transgression, both socially and in the eyes of the church. A love potion that went wrong, causing illness, madness, or death, could easily be construed as maleficium, the use of magic to cause harm, which was a key accusation in witch trials. A jilted lover, a suspicious spouse, or a rival could use the mere rumor of a love philter to destroy a reputation or bring a death sentence. Consequently, these recipes were often written in the most cryptic codes, using veiled language like the root of the little man for mandrake or the tears of a dove for morning dew. The creation of a love potion was therefore an act of tremendous risk, undertaken not by the faint of heart, but by those desperate enough to believe that the chaotic power of love could indeed be captured, bottled, and controlled. But the very knowledge that could heal could also harm, and medieval herbal grimoires did not shy away from this terrifying duality. For every recipe that promised to mend a broken bone or calm a fevered brow, there existed another that detailed the precise methods to induce agony, paralysis, or a silent, untraceable death. This was the dark underbelly of herbal wisdom, a shadowy mirror reflecting the fact that the most potent virtues often resided in the most dangerous plants. To understand these books fully, we must confront their most chilling pages, those dedicated to the creation of poisons and their corresponding antidotes, a testament to an era where the healer's art could seamlessly transform into the assassin's craft. The reasons for including such deadly knowledge were as complex as the poisons themselves. On one hand, there was a grim medical necessity. In a world without modern anesthetics or precise surgical tools, a deep understanding of toxic plants was crucial for their controlled use. A grimoire might contain a recipe for a poultice using a minute amount of deadly nightshade or belladonna to dilate the pupils for eye surgery or to relieve the pain of a deep-seated ache. The key was in the dosage, a concept these early practitioners understood intimately. A tiny, carefully measured amount of hemlock could act as a powerful sedative or antispasmodic, but a slightly larger dose would cause a swift and fatal paralysis. The grimoire served as a vital guide to walking this razor's edge, providing exact instructions on how to prepare and administer these substances to harness their beneficial properties without crossing the lethal threshold. This required not just botanical knowledge, but a profound understanding of the human body's tolerances, a science of measurement and effect born of desperate experimentation. Yet, alongside these medical justifications, the potential for nefarious use was an undeniable and terrifying reality. The same manuscript that taught a physician how to use monk should to slow a racing heart could, in different hands, become a manual for political assassination or personal vengeance. The allure of an untraceable poison was powerful in an age of courtly intrigue and bitter rivalries. A plant like wolfsbane, with its beautiful purple flowers, contains aconitine, a toxin so potent that merely handling the leaves without gloves could lead to absorption through the skin, causing numbness, vomiting, and cardiac arrest. Its symptoms could easily be mistaken for a sudden, severe illness, making it a favorite of whispered legends and feared plots. The grimoire, by preserving this knowledge, democratized this power, placing the tools of the powerful into the hands of anyone literate and desperate enough to use them. It is no wonder that ownership of such a book was often a closely guarded secret, as its contents could imply not just scholarly interest but a capacity for murder. This constant dance between cure and kill is perfectly illustrated by the most infamous plant in the toxicological arsenal, hemlock. Ancient and feared, hemlock was the state poison of Athens, used to execute the philosopher Socrates. A grimoire would describe it with chilling accuracy, noting its distinctive purple spotted stem, feathery leaves, and a smell likened to mouse urine. The text would catalogue its effects: a gradual ascending paralysis starting in the feet, moving upward until it paralyzed the lungs, all while the victim remained fully conscious. This precise description was essential for two reasons. For the healer, it was a vital warning to avoid tragic misidentification when foraging for similar-looking plants like wild carrots or parsley. But for the more sinister reader, it was a guarantee of the poison's effectiveness and a forecast of the victim's grim fate. The plant's dual nature was its defining characteristic. It was both a medical tool of last resort and an instrument of state-sanctioned death or clandestine murder. Recognizing the ever-present danger of these substances, the grimoires almost always paired their poison entries with detailed antidotes, creating a self-contained system of cause and cure. These antidotal recipes reveal a fascinating blend of practical observation and symbolic reasoning. One of the most universally recommended antidotes was theriac, a complex, multi-ingredient concoction sometimes containing dozens of herbs, spices, and even viper's flesh. It was believed to be a universal counterpoison, a sort of panacea against toxins. The preparation of theriac was itself a major public event in some cities, taking days and watched by crowds, as if the ritual itself contributed to its perceived power. A more direct approach involved the principle of like cures like, or sympathetic magic. If a person was suffering from a poison that caused violent vomiting, an antidote might include a tiny amount of a different emetic herb, the logic being that it would drive out the original poison by amplifying and then resolving the body's reaction. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of this dark knowledge was the role of the herbalist as both potential poisoner and soul savior. In a community without hospitals or rapid response, the local wise woman or traveling apothecary was the only hope for someone who had been poisoned, whether accidentally or intentionally. Their grimoire was their emergency manual. A page might detail the signs of arsenic poisoning, violent gastric distress, and a metallic taste in the mouth, and then prescribe a frantic regimen of inducing vomiting with salt water or a feather, followed by administering large quantities of milk or beaten egg whites to bind to the toxin and prevent its absorption. This knowledge placed the herbalist in a position of immense life or death power. They were the only ones who could look at a suffering patient and, based on the symptoms described in their book, identify the specific poison and, hopefully, the correct antidote. This responsibility transformed the grimoire from a simple book of recipes into a sacred covenant, a promise that even in the face of humanity's darkest impulses, the healer's duty was to preserve life, armed with the most dangerous secrets nature had to offer. In a world teeming with unseen threats, from the palpable horror of the plague to the lingering fear of a neighbor's envious glare, the medieval herbal grimoire offered a vital line of defense. These books were not just about curing illness after it struck. They were about building a fortress of protection around the individual, the household, and even the entire community. The recipes and charms dedicated to warding off evil and disease reveal a profound understanding of the psychological and, in some cases, the practical needs of a society living on the edge of catastrophe. At the heart of this defensive arsenal were certain powerful aromatic herbs, sage, rosemary, and rue chief among them, whose pungent scents and robust properties were believed to purify the air both physically and spiritually, creating a barrier against misfortune. The practice of smudging or burning these herbs to create dense, fragrant smoke was one of the most common and widespread protective rituals. While we might associate smudging today with specific indigenous traditions, the medieval European version operated on a similar principle of purification through smoke. A typical grimoire entry might instruct the user to gather a bundle of dried sage and rosemary, tie it with a red thread, and then light it, walking through each room of a house while reciting a prayer, such as the benediction of Saint Michael the Archangel. The smoke was believed to accomplish two critical tasks simultaneously. On a physical level, the strong, volatile oils released by the burning herbs would have acted as a primitive form of fumigation, potentially helping to repel insects and mask the foul odors associated with disease and decay. But on a spiritual level, the smoke was seen as a vehicle for driving out malevolent forces. The thick, cleansing clouds were thought to dislodge lurking spirits, neutralize the poisonous energy of the evil eye, and create a sanctified space where illness could not take root. The ritual itself, the deliberate movement, the focused intention, the recitation of sacred words, transformed a simple act of burning plants into a powerful ceremony of renewal and safety. Beyond the smoke, these protective herbs were often woven into amulets, small packets of power meant to be carried on one's person. A grimoire would provide intricate instructions for creating these personal talismans. A common charm might involve sewing a small square of linen into a pouch and filling it with a specific mixture. perhaps a sprig of rue, known as herb of grace for its ability to ward off witchcraft, a few rosemary needles for steadfast protection, and a clove of garlic to repel any venomous influence. The pouch would then be sewn shut with a specific colored thread, red for power, white for purity, and perhaps anointed with a drop of holy water or consecrated oil. This completed amulet was more than a lucky charm. It was a concentrated repository of botanical and spiritual energy. Carried in a pocket or hung around a child's neck, it served as a constant, tangible reminder of protection, a miniature shield against the uncertainties of the world. The strong, lingering scent of the herbs themselves would have provided a continuous sensory reassurance, a personal cloud of safety that moved with the wearer. The selection of these particular herbs was no accident. Each was chosen for a constellation of symbolic meanings and observed properties that made it a champion in the fight against darkness. Rue, with its bitter taste and strong, musky odor, was considered one of the most powerful anti-magical plants available. Its very name was thought to be derived from the Greek ruta, meaning to set free, and it was believed to free a person from curses and enchantments. Medieval people would sometimes brush rue branches over doorways or hang them above cradles to create an invisible barrier that evil could not cross. Rosemary, revered for its evergreen nature and strong, clean fragrance, was a symbol of remembrance and fidelity, but also of potent protection. It was said that placing rosemary under your pillow would ward off nightmares, and that a bush growing by your garden gate would prevent thieves and witches from entering. Its association with memory also made it a guardian against the spiritual forgetfulness that could leave a soul vulnerable to corruption. The threat they sought to counter was as varied as the remedies themselves, but none was more terrifying than the plague. In the face of a disease that could decimate a town in months, grimoires offered recipes that blended desperate practicality with profound faith. A famous example is the Four Thieves vinegar, a legend that tells of a band of robbers who plundered the homes of plague victims yet remained healthy by bathing in and consuming a special vinegar steeped with protective herbs. While the historical truth is murky, the recipe became a staple of protective grimoires. It called for macerating large quantities of sage, rosemary, rue, lavender, and garlic in strong vinegar for several weeks. The resulting potent liquid was then used to wash the hands, face, and even the thresholds of doors, creating a sour, aromatic shield. The vinegar base, with its acidic nature, would have had genuine antiseptic qualities, while the herbs contributed their own protective symbolism. This blend of a potentially useful cleaning agent with deeply held spiritual beliefs created a powerful tool for managing the overwhelming fear that accompanied an epidemic, giving people a sense of agency when they felt most powerless. This intricate relationship between the physical and the spiritual underscores the holistic nature of medieval protection. A charm was not considered effective unless it addressed all levels of existence. The evil eye, for instance, the belief that a malicious glance could bring sickness or bad luck, was a constant concern. A grimoire might offer a complex solution that involved both a physical action and a spoken word. A mother fearful for her child might be instructed to make a gesture with her hand shaped like horns, an ancient symbol of deflection, while whispering a protective prayer over a sprig of rue. The gesture was the physical deflection, the prayer was the spiritual reinforcement, and the rue was the botanical anchor that held the power. It was a complete system, acknowledging that a threat could enter through the eyes, the air, or the spirit, and required a defense that was equally comprehensive. In the uncertain landscape of the Middle Ages, these protective recipes from the grimoires were not mere superstition. They were essential tools for survival, offering a way to assert control, maintain hope, and carve out small islands of safety in a world filled with visible and invisible dangers. Yet for all their power to heal and protect, these precious books carried a perilous curse, a shadow that grew longer and darker with each passing century. The very knowledge that made a herbal grimoire a lifeline for a community could, in an instant, become the death warrant for its owner. This danger crystallized with terrifying force in the rise of the Inquisition, an institution tasked with rooting out heresy, which increasingly came to view any form of non-sanctioned spiritual power as a direct threat to its authority. The independent healer, whether a village wise woman or a scholarly apothecary, operated outside the strict control of the Church. Their power came not from ordination or holy scripture, but from a personal, often secret, relationship with the natural world. A relationship that suspicious authorities could easily paint as a pact with the devil. The line between a blessed healer and a condemned which was perilously thin, often drawn not by the content of their actions but by the perception of their neighbors. A successful cure could be celebrated as a miracle one day, but if a patient subsequently took a turn for the worse or if a personal rivalry festered, that same act could be twisted into evidence of witchcraft. The grimoire was the ultimate piece of damning evidence. In the hands of an inquisitor, its pages were not read as a testament to healing. The precise astrological symbols became proof of demonic astrology. The prayers spoken over a remedy, if they deviated from strict Latin liturgy, were seen as blasphemous incantations. A recipe calling for the eye of newt might be a coded herbal reference, but in a courtroom it was presented as literal evidence of a grotesque and satanic brew. The book's mere existence demonstrated a literacy and esoteric knowledge that defied the simple, faith-based world the Inquisition sought to enforce, marking its owner as intellectually dangerous. We can feel the chilling reality of this persecution through the surviving trial records. Consider the case of a woman named Walpurga Horsmanin, executed as a witch in 16th century Germany. Among the charges against her was the possession of a book of arts, a handwritten grimoire containing herbal recipes and charms. The court transcript describes how this book was used to convict her, its pages filled with unknown characters and drawings of plants that were declared to be devil's weeds. Her knowledge of which herb could ease childbirth pain was reinterpreted as proof she could curse women with infertility. Her skill in creating protective amulets was evidence she could summon storms to destroy crops. The grimoire, the culmination of a lifetime of learning, was not seen as a medical text but as a physical manifestation of her alleged compact with evil, sealing her horrific fate. This atmosphere of fear forced the creators and keepers of this knowledge to adopt desperate measures for survival. The beautiful, illuminated grimoires of the monasteries were relatively safe under the church's own roof, but the personal notebooks of village healers had to be hidden away, often in ways that break the historian's heart. There are accounts of small, hand-stitched books being sealed inside the walls of cottages, buried in clay pots in the forest, or weighted with stones and sunk to the bottom of wells. These were not acts of careless disposal, but acts of profound love and preservation. The owners were hiding their most treasured possession, hoping that the danger would pass and a future, more enlightened generation might one day discover and understand their work. For many, that day never came. The knowledge died with them, lost forever to the flames of fear and intolerance. The tragic irony is that the Church's own persecution often undermined the very communities it sought to protect. When a wise woman was executed, her village lost its doctor, its midwife, and its counselor. The practical, often effective, herbal knowledge that had been passed down for generations was extinguished, leaving people more vulnerable to disease and misfortune. The Inquisition, in its quest to purify faith, inadvertently created a vacuum of practical care, a void that would take centuries to fill. The shadow it cast over the herbal grimoire was not just one of fear, but of profound cultural loss, severing a vital connection to the natural world and branding a rich tradition of healing as something diabolical. This period stands as a stark reminder that the power of a book lies not only in the words it contains, but in the fear it can inspire in those who cannot decipher its secrets. To see these principles brought to life in a single, breathtaking volume, we can turn to one of the most magnificent surviving manuscripts from the Middle Ages, the Aberdeen Besheri. Created in England around the year 1200, this book is not a grimoire in the sense of a manual for magical rituals, but rather a bestiary, a book of beasts. Yet to dismiss it as a simple medieval zoology text would be to miss its profound significance. The Aberdeen Bestiary is perhaps the ultimate expression of the medieval world we've been exploring, a masterwork that seamlessly weaves together observations of the natural world with deep religious allegory and a pervasive sense of the magical and moral forces believed to inhabit every leaf, stone, and creature. It shows us that the mindset which produced the herbal grimoire was not confined to secretive practitioners. It was the very air that educated society breathed. The book itself is a stunning artifact, a testament to the value placed on this kind of knowledge. Written in a precise Latin hand on fine vellum, its pages are illuminated with brilliantly colored illustrations of animals, both real and fantastical. But the text accompanying each image reveals the book's true purpose. Each creature, from the noble lion to the lowly ant, is presented not for its biological interest, but as a symbol, a moral lesson, and a reflection of divine will. The natural world is treated as a second scripture, a book written by God where every animal is a word and every plant a letter, all pointing to a higher spiritual truth. This is the doctrine of signatures applied to the entire animal kingdom, and it is here that we find a rich tapestry of plant lore integrated directly into the stories of the beasts. Consider the entry for the panther. The bestiary describes this animal as multicolored and immensely attractive to all other beasts, except its enemy, the dragon. After eating its fill, the panther retreats to its cave and sleeps for 3 days. Upon awakening, it lets out a powerful, sweet-smelling roar that draws all animals to it. The allegorical meaning is explicit. The panther represents Christ. The multicolored coat symbolizes the diverse teachings of Christ. The 3 days of sleep represent his death and descent into hell. And the sweet-smelling roar is the gospel, drawing all souls to salvation. The dragon who flees from the scent is the devil. This narrative is not complete without its botanical element. The text specifies that the panther's den is surrounded by a particular plant, which the illustrator depicts with careful detail. This plant represents the faithful, growing around and supporting the figure of Christ. The animal, the allegory, and the plant are inextricably linked, each giving meaning to the others in a single, unified lesson. Another powerful example is the entry for the elephant. The bestiary recounts a fascinating, if fanciful, story about elephant society. It claims that when elephants wish to have offspring, they travel eastward towards paradise, where the female eats from the mandragora or mandrake plant, and the male eats from another tree. This act enables them to conceive. The illustration often shows the elephant standing beside a tree, with the distinctive human-shaped root of the mandrake clearly visible. Here, the mandrake is not a tool for love potions or dark magic as it might be in a more clandestine grimoire. Instead, its potent, life-giving properties are sanctified, placed within a divinely ordained narrative of procreation and connected directly to the earthly paradise. The plant's power is acknowledged, but it is framed within a Christian cosmology, its virtue channeled for a sacred purpose. This demonstrates how the same plant could be understood in multiple ways, as a natural wonder, a symbolic key, and a participant in a holy story, all depending on the context of the book that contained it. The Aberdeen Bestiary, therefore, acts as a crucial bridge. It shows us that the symbolic language we find in the more secretive herbal grimoires was actually part of a mainstream, accepted way of thinking. The monk painting a panther surrounded by faithful plants in the bestiary was operating on the same fundamental principles as the wise woman gathering herbs under a specific moon phase. Both believed the physical world was saturated with spiritual meaning. Both used symbols and signatures to decode that meaning. The primary difference was one of audience and sanction. The bestiary was a public, educational tool approved by the church designed to teach morality through nature. The personal herbal grimoire was a private, practical manual, often operating on the fringes of official approval, designed for direct intervention in the world through healing and protection. Examining this beautiful book allows us to understand that the medieval world did not have a sharp divide between science, religion, and magic. These were overlapping, fluid categories. The science was observing that a panther has a sweet breath. The religion was interpreting that as the sweetness of Christ's message, and the magic was the inherent, mysterious power believed to be present in the event itself. The Aberdeen Bestiary is a gallery of these interconnected ideas. It is a preserved moment in time, a window into a mentality where a flower was never just a flower, an animal was never just an animal, and a book was never just a collection of words, but a key to unlocking the hidden, divine order of the universe. In its glorious pages, we find the same yearning for understanding that fueled the creators of the herbal grimoires, here refined into a radiant and sanctioned art form, proving that the desire to find meaning in nature was a driving force at the very heart of medieval culture. Among these remarkable creators, few figures shine as brightly or as uniquely as Hildegard von Bingen, a 12th century Benedictine abbess whose life and work defy easy categorization. A mystic, composer, theologian, and natural philosopher, Hildegard was a true polymath, and her contributions to the world of herbal knowledge stand as a testament to her visionary mind. Her masterpiece, the Physica, is far more than a simple list of plants. It is a profound herbal grimoire that seamlessly weaves together threads of divine revelation, meticulous observation, and practical healing into a magnificent tapestry. What sets the Physica apart from other texts of its time is its foundation in Hildegard's unique theology, particularly her concept of viriditas, or greening power. For Hildegard, this was the animating life force of the universe, the vibrant spiritual energy of God that pulsated through all of creation, flowing through every leaf, stone, and human soul. This was not an abstract idea but a tangible reality. Sickness, in her view, was a withering of this viriditas within a person, a loss of spiritual and physical vitality. Health, therefore, was achieved by restoring this divine greening power, and the natural world was God's own pharmacy, overflowing with the very substances needed to do so. The structure of the Physica reflects this holistic and all-encompassing worldview. Organized into 9 books, it catalogues the healing properties of plants, elements, trees, stones, fish, birds, animals, and even metals. This comprehensive scope alone is staggering, demonstrating Hildegard's belief that every facet of creation held medicinal virtue and could be understood through its relationship to the divine. Her entries on plants are particularly illuminating. She describes each one with a clear eye for its physical characteristics, but then immediately connects these observations to their spiritual and therapeutic Chinese letter. For instance, she writes of the noble oak tree, noting its strength and longevity, and prescribes its ash for treating internal ailments, seeing in its enduring nature a reflection of God's steadfastness that can be transferred to a frail human body. She doesn't just say a plant is hot or cold in the classical humoral sense. She describes its essence, its viriditas, and how it interacts with the human condition. Her recommendations often blend this spiritual insight with remarkably practical and sometimes surprisingly modern-sounding advice. She suggests fennel for a wide array of digestive issues, a use supported today by its carminative properties. She praises sage for its cleansing and healing powers, noting its effectiveness for sore throats. But alongside these familiar remedies are more unique prescriptions deeply tied to her symbolic thinking. She might recommend a gemstone be placed in wine to create a healing elixir, believing the stone's inherent viriditas could be transferred to the liquid and then to the person drinking it. A recipe for a salve might include not only herbs but also instructions for prayers to be recited during its preparation, making the healer a co-creator with God in the act of restoration. The Physica is a working manual, but every instruction is framed within a cosmic context where the material and the spiritual are indivisible. Hildegard's authority did not stem solely from her intellectual prowess or her access to classical texts, though she certainly had both. It was profoundly rooted in her identity as a visionary. From a young age, she experienced powerful mystical visions, which she eventually documented in works like Sivia's Know the Ways. These were not private meditations but audacious public proclamations that she initially hesitated to share, fearing disbelief. Yet, with the support of the Pope himself, her visions were recognized as divinely inspired. This sanctioned mysticism granted her a unique platform, allowing her to speak on matters of science and medicine with an authority that few women of her time could ever claim. She was not just a herbalist, she was a prophetess interpreting the book of nature as it had been revealed to her by God. This divine mandate infused the Physica with a weight and credibility that lifted it above mere folklore, positioning it as a sacred text for navigating the physical world. To truly appreciate the Physica, one must consider the world in which it was written. The 12th century was a period of great intellectual ferment, often called the Renaissance of the 12th century. Monasteries like Hildegard's were hubs of learning, preserving and copying ancient knowledge while also fostering new ideas. Hildegard was very much a part of this movement, yet she brought a distinctly personal and integrative approach. While male scholars might debate the works of Aristotle in Latin, Hildegard was synthesizing book learning with her own observations of the German countryside around her abbey, and most importantly with her direct spiritual experiences. Her work represents a powerful female voice in a field often dominated by men, a voice that spoke with confidence about the body, illness, and the natural world from a perspective that was both deeply faithful and empirically grounded. The enduring legacy of the Physica is a testament to its power. For centuries, it served as a vital reference within monastic communities and beyond. But its significance today goes far beyond its historical value as a medieval oddity. Hildegard's concept of viriditas resonates strongly with modern holistic health movements that view well-being as a balance of mind, body, and spirit. Her emphasis on the healing power of nature and the interconnectedness of all life feels strikingly contemporary. Reading the Physica is not just an exercise in historical curiosity. It is an invitation to see the world through the eyes of a visionary who found the sacred in the sap of a tree and the cure for despair in the scent of a flower. In Hildegard von Bingen's work, the herbal grimoire reaches one of its most sophisticated and spiritually profound expressions, a bridge between heaven and earth written by a woman who was convinced she could hear the green, growing things whispering the secrets of their creator. But this sacred knowledge was a double-edged sword, and those who possessed it lived with a constant, chilling fear. The very recipes that could heal a child's fever could, in the wrong hands, be twisted into evidence of a pact with darkness. So, how did these scholars and healers protect their most precious secrets? They became masters of concealment, weaving intricate webs of codes and ciphers directly into the pages of their grimoires, transforming these books of power into puzzles that only the worthy could solve. This was not a game, it was a matter of life and death, a necessary art of obscurity to safeguard wisdom from persecution. One of the most straightforward yet effective methods was the use of simple substitution ciphers. Imagine a recipe that begins not with the name of a plant, but with a string of seemingly random letters. To the uninitiated, it was pure gibberish, but to an apprentice who had been entrusted with the key, it was a clear instruction. A common technique was the Caesar shift, where each letter in the alphabet is replaced by another a fixed number of positions away. For example, using a shift of 3, the word rue, a powerful protective herb, would be written as ux. The grimoire might not even state the shift number explicitly. That would be part of the oral tradition, passed from master to student in a whisper. This created a vital layer of security. Even if the book was discovered, its contents remained locked behind a linguistic door. The cipher was a test, a way to ensure that the reader had been granted permission to access the dangerous knowledge within. Beyond full-word ciphers, creators employed a bewildering array of cryptic abbreviations and symbolic shorthand. This was particularly common in the margins of manuscripts, where space was limited and speed was essential. A healer might use a unique symbol, a squiggle, a star, a tiny drawing of an animal, to represent an entire concept or a dangerous ingredient. A drawing of a serpent might not mean snake, but could be code for the root of the bistort plant used as an antidote for venom. The abbreviation SV might stand for spiritus vini or alcohol, but it could just as easily be a personal code for something far more potent and secret. This personalized language made each grimoire a unique fingerprint of its owner's mind. A rival attempting to steal the book would find the abbreviations incomprehensible, and an inquisitor would see not a medical text but a demonic alphabet, further sealing the fate of the owner. The ambiguity was a feature, not a bug. It allowed the creator to deny the true meaning of the symbols if confronted, claiming they were mere doodles or private notes. Perhaps the most visually striking of all these techniques was the use of mirror writing. Famously associated with Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, this practice of writing sentences backwards from right to left was also a tool for occult secrecy. To read a recipe written in mirror script, one would need to hold the page up to a reflective surface, like a polished piece of metal or a still pool of water in a dark bowl. The act of decoding itself became a ritual, a deliberate and slow process that required special equipment and focused intention. This was a powerful deterrent against casual snooping. A suspicious neighbor or a lazy official flipping through the pages would see only incomprehensible, reversed text and likely dismiss the book as the ravings of a madman. But for the true initiate, the reflection in the mirror revealed the truth, unlocking the words as if by magic. This method perfectly encapsulated the grimoire's essence. It presented a distorted, inverted face to the world, hiding its luminous secrets in plain sight, waiting for someone with the key, both literal and metaphorical, to see them rightly. The motivation for this elaborate secrecy was deeply pragmatic. In an era where literacy was a rare skill, the ability to read and write was already a form of power. To then encode that writing was to create a second, even more exclusive layer of authority. It protected the healer from accusations of witchcraft by making their recipes unintelligible to hostile authorities. It also protected their trade secrets from rivals and ensured that their hard-won knowledge could not be easily stolen. But perhaps most profoundly, the use of ciphers reinforced the sacred nature of the knowledge itself. The very act of having to decode a recipe implied that the information was not for everyone. It required patience, intelligence, and dedication. It separated the curious dabbler from the serious student, ensuring that the powerful secrets of life and death would only be entrusted to those who had proven themselves worthy of the responsibility. The coded grimoire was therefore more than a hidden book. It was a silent teacher, its first lesson being the virtue of discretion and the grave weight of the wisdom it contained. Yet the true measure of these manuscripts' power is not merely that they survived, but that the seeds of thought they contained would eventually blossom into the modern world. The legacy of the herbal grimoires is a story of slow, deliberate transformation, where practices born from a blend of magic and observation gradually shed their mystical skin to reveal the bare bones of empirical science. This evolution is perhaps most visible in the very foundation of modern medicine, the pharmacopoeia. When you walk into a pharmacy today, you are stepping into the direct intellectual descendant of the apothecary's workshop. The rows of meticulously labeled bottles, the precise dosages, the standardized formulations, all of these principles have their roots in the grimoires. These ancient books were the first serious attempts to systematically catalog the therapeutic properties of natural substances. A medieval monk recording that willow bark tea eases pain was conducting a clinical trial on a village scale, and his careful notation of the results, copied and recopied over centuries, created a durable body of evidence that later physicians could build upon. The shift was not in the initial discovery, but in the gradual reinterpretation of why it worked. The viriditas or celestial virtue gave way to the active chemical compound, but the fundamental link between the plant and the physiological effect remained the same, a truth first documented by those early, observant healers. This transition from mystical virtue to identifiable agent was championed by revolutionary figures who stand as bridges between the old world and the new. The Swiss physician Paracelsus, working in the 16th century, is a quintessential example. He was a product of the grimoire tradition, deeply versed in alchemy and the doctrine of signatures. Yet he famously rejected slavish devotion to ancient authorities like Galen, urging physicians to learn directly from nature. Paracelsus introduced the revolutionary idea that specific illnesses could be targeted by specific chemical remedies, coining the principle that the dose makes the poison. While he still framed his work in alchemical terms, seeking to isolate the quintessential healing power or arcanum from a plant or mineral, his methodology was a clear move toward experimental chemistry. He replaced the complex herbal mixtures of traditional grimoires with simpler, more potent chemical preparations, using substances like mercury, sulfur, and arsenic. This was a dangerous but decisive step. It shifted the focus from the holistic essence of a plant to the identifiable, isolatable component within it that produced the effect, laying the conceptual groundwork for the isolation of active ingredients like morphine from opium or digitalis from foxglove centuries later. In the field of botany, the grimoire's influence is equally profound. The very act of illustrating plants for identification, however stylized initially, established a tradition of careful observation that would become the core of botanical science. Early herbals, like the works of Dioscorides that were copied and annotated in monasteries, were the precursors to the modern botanical field guide. As the Renaissance dawned, artists and scientists began to collaborate more closely, striving for ever greater accuracy in their depictions. The mystical symbols slowly faded from the pages, but the detailed attention to the number of petals, the shape of the leaves, and the structure of the roots remained. This drive for precise visual documentation was essential for the correct identification of species, which is the bedrock of botany. It allowed for the reliable exchange of knowledge across regions and languages. When Carl Linnaeus developed his system of binomial nomenclature in the 18th century, giving each plant a universal Latin name, he was building upon centuries of work by herbalists who had first struggled to name and categorize the bewildering diversity of the plant kingdom. The grimoire's index of plants, organized by form or property, was the primitive ancestor of Linnaeus's sophisticated taxonomic system. Perhaps the most significant legacy of these texts is not a specific discovery, but the underlying mindset they encouraged, a commitment to empirical observation. While the medieval herbalist interpreted their observations through a lens of spiritual correspondences, they were first and foremost keen watchers of the natural world. They noted that a particular moss only grew on the north side of trees, that a certain flower opened its petals at dawn, and that a specific root, when chewed, numbed the tongue. They recorded these correlations meticulously, creating a vast repository of cause and effect relationships. This habitual, disciplined observation is the very engine of the scientific method. The great shift of the scientific revolution was to take this same observational data and seek natural, mechanical explanations for it, rather than supernatural or symbolic ones. The grimoires kept the flame of systematic inquiry alive during centuries when other forms of learning were precarious. They preserved not only the practical knowledge of the ancient world, but also the intellectual habit of looking closely at nature and trusting the evidence of the senses. a habit that would eventually empower figures like Galileo and Newton to unlock the laws of the universe itself. So the next time you take an aspirin for a headache, remember the willow bark tea. When you see a detailed botanical illustration, think of the illuminated manuscripts. And when you appreciate the precision of a modern medical diagnosis, consider the long, slow journey from the holistic visions of Hildegard von Bingen to the targeted therapies of today. The herbal grimoires were not a detour in the history of science, they were an essential part of the path. They represent a crucial stage in humanity's relationship with the natural world, a time when we began to move from passive awe to active investigation. These books are a testament to the enduring human drive to understand, to heal, and to master our environment. They remind us that our current knowledge is built upon the accumulated wisdom of countless forgotten experimenters, men and women who, by the flickering light of a candle, dared to write down what they saw, blending faith with observation and magic with medicine, to create a legacy that continues to shape our world in ways they could never have imagined. This enduring legacy is not confined to the pages of history books or the sterile environment of a modern laboratory. It is alive and well, flourishing in a place you might not expect, the heart of the contemporary wellness movement. The current resurgence of interest in herbalism and holistic medicine is, in many ways, a homecoming, a quiet but powerful acknowledgement of the very principles that guided the creators of the medieval grimoires. Today, as people seek alternatives to synthetic pharmaceuticals and a more personal connection to their health, they are unconsciously walking a path first laid down by monks in scriptoria and wise women in their cottages, rediscovering a worldview where the health of the body is inseparable from the wellness of the spirit and the environment. This modern revival often begins with a sense of disillusionment. In an age of industrialized medicine, where a doctor's visit can feel rushed and prescriptions treat symptoms in isolation, many feel a deep disconnect. There is a growing hunger for a more participatory form of healthcare, one that empowers the individual and acknowledges the complex interplay of diet, stress, environment, and emotion. This is precisely the void that modern herbalism seeks to fill. When someone today decides to grow a windowsill planter of calming chamomile or soothing lavender, they are engaging in the same fundamental act of agency as a medieval person cultivating their physic garden. They are taking responsibility for their own well-being, using tools provided directly by nature. The motivation is strikingly similar, a desire for gentle, time-tested remedies that work in harmony with the body's own rhythms rather than overwhelming them. What truly sets this modern iteration apart, however, and gives it a powerful new credibility, is the rigorous scrutiny of science. The intuitive claims of the grimoires are no longer taken on faith. They are being placed under the microscope, both literally and figuratively. That willow bark tea prescribed for pain is now understood through the language of biochemistry. Scientists have isolated and identified salicylic acid, synthesized it into acetylsalicylic acid, and created aspirin, one of the most widely used drugs in the world. This process of validation is happening across the botanical world. The potent antimicrobial allicin in garlic, the liver-supporting silymarin in milk thistle, the anti-inflammatory curcumin in turmeric. These are no longer mysterious virtues but defined chemical compounds whose mechanisms of action are being meticulously mapped. Modern clinical trials are putting ancient recipes to the test, often confirming their efficacy, and just as importantly, establishing safe dosage levels, something the grimoires could only estimate through risky trial and error. This scientific validation is creating a fascinating new hybrid discipline, often called phytopharmacology or ethnobotany. Researchers are actively using historical texts, including translations of grimoires and herbals, as leads for new drug discovery. They approach these ancient books not as superstitious curiosities, but as dense databases of centuries of human experimentation. A mention of a rare jungle vine used by a shamanic tradition to treat fever can lead a research team to isolate a novel compound with potent anti-malarial properties. In this light, the medieval grimoire is transformed from an artifact of magic into a valuable, if cryptic, scientific document. The magic is being decoded into molecules, and the spells are being rewritten as standardized pharmaceutical protocols. This partnership between past and present is yielding tangible results, proving that the line between ancient wisdom and modern science is far more permeable than we once believed. Yet, for all the power of laboratory analysis, the most profound connection to the grimoire tradition may lie in the philosophical shift back towards holistic healing. The medieval herbalist never treated a disease in isolation. They treated a person whose life was out of balance with their environment, their community, or the cosmos. Modern holistic medicine is rediscovering this essential truth. Functional medicine practitioners, for example, spend hours with patients looking at genetics, lifestyle, and environmental toxins to find the root cause of an illness rather than simply suppressing its symptoms. This mirrors the grimoire's approach of seeing a skin condition not just as a topical issue, but as a sign of an internal imbalance of the humors or a spiritual stagnation. The modern emphasis on treating the whole person, mind, body, and spirit is a direct echo of the integrated worldview that produced the herbal grimoires, suggesting that after centuries of reductionist science, we are circling back to a more complete and perhaps more compassionate understanding of what it means to be truly well. To truly appreciate the physical reality of these books, we must move beyond simply reading their words and step into the shoes of the person who made them. While we can study the secrets contained within the pages, there is a deeper level of understanding that comes only from the act of creation itself. This is a knowledge written not in ink, but in the strain of the hand, the scent of the parchment, and the patient passage of time. To explore this, we are going to step out of the past and into the studio of a modern scribe, an artist named Ilara who has dedicated herself to the monumental task of recreating a medieval herbal grimoire using only the tools and techniques available 800 years ago. Her project is more than an artistic endeavor. It is a form of experimental archaeology, a journey to understand the medieval mind through the labor of the body. Ilara's workspace is a far cry from a monastic scriptorium, yet the spirit is identical. Instead of a quiet stone chamber, she works in a sunlit studio, but the air carries the same ancient smells: the tang of iron gall ink, the earthy scent of handmade parchment, and the faint, sweet fragrance of gum arabic. Her tools are not mass-produced, each one has a story. The quills are carefully selected goose feathers, cured and cut by her own hand. The ink is not from a bottle but brewed in small batches from oak galls, iron sulfate, and gum arabic, a process that requires patience and a precise hand to avoid creating a corrosive liquid that would eat through the page. The parchment itself is a revelation. Modern paper is uniform and sterile, but the vellum Ilara uses is made from calfskin, each sheet possessing its own unique texture, thickness, and even subtle memories of the animal's life in the form of faint hair follicles or minor scars. To write on this surface is to collaborate with a once living being, a stark reminder that these books were born from the natural world in the most intimate way possible. The greatest challenge, she explains, is not the writing itself, but the sheer, overwhelming scale of the project. A single page of a grimoire might contain hundreds of words of text, intricate decorative borders, and one or more detailed botanical illustrations. A single mistake, a blotched letter, a misplaced line in a drawing could mean days of work lost. There are no delete keys, no undo functions. This constant pressure forces a state of hyper-focused mindfulness. Every stroke of the quill is a deliberate commitment. Ilara describes the sensation as a form of meditation, a silencing of the modern mind's chatter in favor of a slow, rhythmic concentration. This, she believes, is where the first insight into the medieval scribe emerges. The act of copying was not a mindless task, it was an immersive, devotional practice. The slow pace allowed for deep contemplation of each word, each symbol. As she carefully draws the serrated leaf of a sage plant, she isn't just illustrating, she is internalizing its form, its essence, in a way that a quick photograph could never achieve. The knowledge seeps into the creator through the fingertips. Perhaps the most profound insight gained from this hands-on work concerns the illustrations. Working from pixel-perfect digital scans of original manuscripts, Ilara initially assumed her task was one of simple replication. She quickly learned otherwise. The vibrant colors of the illuminations did not come from a tidy set of manufactured paints. They were alchemical wonders in their own right. Grinding lapis lazuli into a fine powder to create the celestial blue for a Virgin Mary's robe was an expensive and time-consuming process. The brilliant reds came from vermilion, a toxic mercury compound, or from crushed insects like worms. The greens were often derived from verdigris, the green patina that forms on copper. These were not benign art supplies, they were materials pulled from the mineral and animal kingdoms, each with its own properties and dangers. To paint with them was to engage directly with the same elemental forces described in the grimoires pages. The scribe wasn't just depicting a plant, they were handling the very substances, metals, minerals, earth, that they believed were connected to the planets and stars governing that plant's power. The art was a physical ritual in itself. Ilara's project has transformed her understanding of what these books truly were. They were not merely containers of information. They were physical repositories of time, labor, and intention. The value of a grimoire was not just in the secrets it held, but in the immense human investment it represented. A single book could represent a year or more of a scribe's life, a significant portion of their earthly existence dedicated to this one object. This imbued the finished book with a weight, a presence that a printed volume can never possess. It explains why they were treated with such reverence, even fear. To hold a grimoire was to hold hundreds of hours of a person's life, their focused intention and their belief, all condensed into leather and parchment. For Ilara, the greatest lesson has been one of humility. In our age of instant information, the slow, deliberate craft of the scribe reminds us that some forms of understanding cannot be rushed. They must be earned, one carefully drawn letter, one patiently ground pigment at a time. Her work is a bridge allowing us to feel, if only for a moment, the profound connection between the hand, the heart, and the hidden knowledge of the earth that defined the world of the medieval herbal grimoire. And so, as we close these ancient, heavy covers, we are left with a profound realization. These herbal grimoires were never just one thing. They were not simply medical textbooks, nor were they exclusively books of magic. They were something far more complex and far more human. They were portable pharmacies offering remedies for everything from a common cough to a broken heart. They were detailed laboratories recording centuries of chemical experimentation with plants and minerals. And they were profound spiritual guides, providing a framework for understanding humanity's place within a living, breathing, and enchanted cosmos. They defy our modern categories, existing instead in a rich, interconnected space where a prayer was as important as a poultice, and the phase of the moon was a critical step in any recipe. These manuscripts stand as powerful monuments to an enduring human quest, the relentless drive to understand the natural world and to harness its power for our survival and betterment. In an era without microscopes or clinical trials, the creators of these books used the tools they had: keen observation, deep intuition, and an unshakable belief in the interconnectedness of all things. They looked at a forest and saw not just a collection of trees, but a vast divine library, each plant a volume filled with secrets waiting to be read. This was not a primitive worldview, but a holistic one, acknowledging that healing the body required tending to the spirit, and that true knowledge encompassed both the seen and the unseen. The grimoire was the tangible result of this philosophy, a brave attempt to map the mysterious terrain where earth meets sky and science dances with the soul. The legacy of these books is not confined to the past. It whispers to us every time we seek a natural remedy for a modern ailment, every time we feel a sense of awe walking through a garden, and every time we recognize that our well-being is tied to the world around us. The medieval herbalist's quest is in many ways our own. We still strive to decode nature's secrets, though we now use the language of genomics instead of astrological correspondences. The fundamental desire remains to alleviate suffering, to prolong health, and to find meaning in the intricate web of life. These grimoires remind us that the path to knowledge is often winding, paved with both brilliant insights and beautiful misconceptions, but it is a path walked with courage and wonder. This journey through the secrets of medieval herbal grimoires inevitably sparks a deeper curiosity about the countless other mysteries that history has yet to fully reveal. It makes you wonder about the libraries that were lost to fire, the personal journals that crumbled to dust, and the oral traditions that faded with the last speaker of a language. Our shared past is filled with silent chapters, each holding potential answers to questions we are only beginning to ask, so we'd love to hear from you. If you could unlock one secret from the past, if you could hold any lost book or witness any forgotten moment in history, what would it be? Would you want to read the complete library of Alexandria? Decipher an unknown language on a crumbling tablet, or perhaps sit in a wise woman's cottage and learn the recipes she never dared to write down? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your curiosity is what keeps the spirit of these ancient seekers alive, reminding us that the greatest grimoire of all is the unwritten story of humanity itself, a story we are all still